In 1918, General John Pershing watched German aircraft strafe his infantry formations with impunity, their fabric-covered fuselages absorbing rifle-caliber rounds without suffering fatal damage. He demanded a weapon that could reach up into the sky and kill. Engineers at Springfield Armory calculated the requirements with precision. To reliably damage aircraft structures at 600 yards required a bullet carrying at least 11,000 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. To achieve that energy in a controllable automatic weapon required a cartridge large enough to generate massive chamber pressure, but small enough that a human portable weapon could handle the recoil forces. The sweet spot emerged at 0.50 inches, 12.7 millimeters in metric measurement. Used standard ball ammunition for the new cartridge used a bullet of approximately 700 grains propelled by substantial powder charges, achieving muzzle velocities approaching 3,000 feet per second. This generated over 13,000 foot-pounds of muzzle energy, exceeding the minimum requirement by 20% and providing the margin needed for real-world combat conditions. But energy alone meant nothing without the mechanical system to harness it reliably. John Browning, already responsible for the M1917 and M1919 machine guns that armed American infantry, scaled up his proven recoil-operated design. The fundamental principle remained identical. Barrel and bolt locked together during firing, recoiling rearward together, the bolt unlocking and continuing back while the barrel stopped, the bolt stripping a fresh round from the ammunition belt on its return stroke. This elegant mechanism required precise headspace and timing adjustments, and any deviation from proper settings could cause feeding failures or dangerous case ruptures. What changed was scale and engineering tolerance. The receiver stretched to 45 inches to accommodate the larger cartridge. The barrel thickened substantially to handle sustained fire at 450 rounds per minute without warping. The complete weapon weighed 84 pounds without its tripod, heavy enough to absorb the punishing recoil impulse, light enough for a 4-man crew to relocate under fire. The cartridge itself represented a triumph of terminal ballistics engineering. The standard ball round carried a hardened steel core capable of penetrating 0.875 inches of face-hardened armor plate at 100 yards. Against the 8mm armor on German half-tracks, the geometry finally worked in American favor. Against aircraft aluminum, rounds often punched through skin, spars, and control surfaces with energy to spare for secondary damage. Against infantry in the open, the devastation defied clinical description. A single round striking a human torso could transfer enough kinetic energy to cause hydrostatic shock throughout the entire body cavity. The weapon's versatility emerged from its mounting options and adaptability. On the M3 tripod, it served as heavy infantry support, capable of engaging targets at 1,800 yards with aimed fire. Mounted in pairs or quads on the M45 Maxim turret, according to Luftwaffe after-action reports, it became one of the most effective anti-aircraft systems in the European theater, 4 barrels delivering 2,000 rounds per minute into low-flying aircraft attempting ground attack runs. Bolted to the turret ring of an M4 Sherman tank, it gave tank commanders a weapon that could suppress infantry, engage light vehicles, and discourage strafing runs from enemy fighters. The mechanism, ammunition supply, and maintenance procedures remained consistent across tactical applications, spanning the entire spectrum of ground combat operations. Luftwaffe after-action reports from Normandy, according to captured German documents, noted that American anti-aircraft fire had become dramatically more lethal than in North Africa campaigns. The difference was saturation deployment. By June 1944, every American armored division deployed over 200 of these weapons in various configurations across its units. A low-level attack run meant flying through overlapping fields of fire from dozens of guns firing simultaneously. The weapon's effectiveness against ground targets proved equally decisive in infantry combat. At Lanzerath on December 16, 1944, the 18 men of the IM&R platoon held their position for nearly a full day against a regiment of Fallschirmjäger. Their rifle-caliber weapons inflicted substantial casualties in sustained defensive fire, but they could not stop the armored vehicles advancing behind the infantry. When they finally withdrew under overwhelming pressure, they had delayed Kampfgruppe Peiper by precious hours. Hours that might have been minutes if they had possessed the heavier weapon mounted on the half-tracks they watched advance past their position. American logistics had prioritized ammunition commonality, ensuring that rifle-caliber rounds reached every unit reliably. The heavier ammunition, with its specialized supply chain requirements, often arrived late or not at all to forward positions. Units equipped with the weapon sometimes fought without it simply because the 100-round belts weighed 11 pounds each, and trucks carrying small arms ammunition took priority on congested roads. The Germans adapted their tactics accordingly. The German tactical manuals from late 1944 documented procedures for identifying the distinctive muzzle flash signature and prioritizing those positions for immediate destruction with main gunfire. Infantry learned to approach American vehicles from angles that masked the weapon's field of fire and limited traverse. Half-track drivers learned through bitter experience that frontal approaches often invited destruction, but flanking movements against the weapon's slow traverse speed could succeed. The adaptation demonstrated the weapon's tactical significance. German commanders devoted training time and manual space to countering a specific American weapon system, indicating its operational impact on Wehrmacht assault planning. By January 1945, German tactical manuals included detailed sections on identifying and neutralizing the American heavy machine gun positions before advancing infantry or armor. The weapon had become important enough to plan operations around, feared enough to avoid when possible, and respected enough to study in training. By war's end, the M2 had been deployed across every American theater in configurations ranging from fixed fortifications to mobile armor. The first Browning M, 2 heavy-barrel .50 caliber machine gun to arrive at that frozen crossroads, came mounted on a half-track that had thrown a track link 3 miles back. The crew had dismounted the weapon, manhandled it onto a makeshift tripod improvised from timber and frozen earth, and positioned it covering the road from Malmedy. The receiver and barrel assembly, the M3 tripod, and the ammunition together formed a defensive position that weighed over 100 pounds. The 3-man crew had dragged this killing machinery through knee-deep snow because they understood what was coming down that road, and they understood what the Browning M2 could do to it. The weapon's specifications read like a bridge between infantry and artillery. Overall length, 65 inches with the standard 45-inch barrel. Caliber, .50 BMG, Browning machine gun, a cartridge designed in 1918 specifically to defeat the armored threats emerging from the First World War. The M2 HB variant that dominated the Second World War featured the heavy barrel modification introduced in 1933, which allowed sustained fire without the water-cooling jacket of earlier designs. That barrel weighed 24 pounds by itself, machined from ordnance steel to extremely tight tolerances. The action operated on short recoil with a rotating bolt head, feeding from disintegrating metallic link belts at a cyclic rate deliberately kept between 450 and 575 rounds per minute, slower than contemporary medium machine guns, but that reduced rate prevented barrel overheating during the extended engagements the weapon was designed to sustain. The German column that approached the crossroads at 0847 hours consisted of 3 SDK FZ 251 half-tracks carrying Panzer Grenadiers, followed by a Kubelwagen and 2 trucks loaded with ammunition. The lead half-track's driver saw the muzzle flash before he heard the sound. The .50 caliber's report arriving a fraction of a second after the 661 grain armor-piercing incendiary round that punched through his engine compartment. Against face-hardened armor plate, the M2 could penetrate nearly an inch at 100 yards, decreasing to 3/4 of an inch at 500 yards. The SDKFZ 251's frontal armor measured 14.5 millimeters, 0.57 inches. At the engagement range of approximately 400 yards, the armor-piercing round retained sufficient velocity to defeat the half-track's protection with energy to spare for the men and machinery behind it. Each round carried 12,400 foot-pounds of muzzle energy, and even at that distance retained sufficient velocity to defeat the half-track's protection with energy to spare for the men and machinery behind it. But the M2 carried limitations that its crews learned through bitter experience. The weapon's weight made it effectively immobile once emplaced. Repositioning under fire meant abandoning the tripod or accepting casualties. The headspace and timing adjustment required precise mechanical knowledge. Improper settings caused failures to feed, failures to fire, or catastrophic case ruptures. In the Ardennes cold, lubricants thickened and action sluggish. That morning at the crossroads, the crew's assistant gunner kept a canteen of gasoline tucked against his body, periodically applying it to the bolt assembly to prevent freezing. The M2 demanded attention, demanded expertise, demanded physical strength to serve effectively. The German 2-centimeter Flak A-30 pressed into ground rolls offered superior armor penetration at 20mm caliber, but weighed 450 kilograms in its ground mount and required a crew of 7. The Soviet DSHK 1938 heavy machine gun matched the M2's caliber at 12.7 millimeters, but weighed considerably more at 73.5 pounds for the receiver alone. Against both competitors, the Browning offered the critical advantage of sustained fire from belt feed rather than magazines. A trained crew could maintain accurate bursts for minutes rather than seconds, suppressing or destroying targets that heavier weapons would engage once before reloading. German after-action reports from late 1944 specifically noted the American heavy machine gun's effectiveness against lightly armored vehicles, recommending that half-track commanders avoid exposing their vehicles to American positions until heavier support could suppress the threat. Captured German documents from the Ardennes referenced the Schweres Amerikanisches MG as requiring priority neutralization during assault operations, an acknowledgement that the M2's combination of range, penetration, and sustained fire created a defensive capability disproportionate to its crew size. By 0923 hours, the crossroads had become a graveyard of German transport. The 3 half-tracks burned, their fuel and ammunition cooking off in secondary explosions that sent tracers arcing randomly into the gray sky. The Kübelwagen had attempted to reverse and caught a burst through its thin bodywork that killed the driver and both passengers. The ammunition trucks had never stopped. Their drivers had seen the destruction ahead and attempted to flee, but the M2's maximum effective range against vehicle targets exceeded 2,000 yards. They made it perhaps 800 yards before the gunner walked his fire into their canvas-covered beds. SACTEC Manufacturing, Buffalo Arms Corporation, and other contractors had produced over 2 million M2 receivers by war's end at a production cost that reflected the weapon's complexity and precision machining requirements. The same weapon that defended that frozen crossroads served simultaneously on B-17 waist mounts over Germany, PT boat decks in the Pacific, and Sherman turrets across France. No other weapon of the war achieved such universal deployment across every service branch and every theater. The snow continued falling on the Ardennes crossroads as the M2's barrel cooled. The weapon remained in position through the afternoon, covering the road as American reinforcements arrived to fortify the position that 3 men and 1 machine gun had held against an entire German column.